Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 74 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian finishing my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and the listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast is something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Jessica in Dubai, Ashley and Wendy in Georgia, Jan and Melanie in Louisiana, Julie in Virginia, Renee in Pennsylvania, Courtney and Lisa in Michigan, Amy in Massachusetts, who wrote a very kind message, which I asked if I could share. And Amy wrote, quote, I happily, accidentally discovered your podcast series the other day. So far, I've only listened to 3. But they have already made a positive difference in my approach to my work as an elementary library teacher. This is only my 2nd year. I worked in a different district last year. I have so much to learn. Given the pandemic situation, it has allowed me some time to explore some new technology and resources with which I have not had experience. I look forward to listening to more podcasts, end quote. Amy also added, quote, although I am new to school librarianship, I taught preschool for many years and held supporting teaching positions in a public school. However, a few years ago, I was fortunate to hold a summer school library teaching position for a district's elementary ELL program, and that inspired me to pursue the library teaching license part-time. Now I have the license and so much more to learn. I also worked in a children's room in a public library some time ago, creating fond memories of working in the library and, of course, a dedicated lifelong patron, end quote. I also want to thank Elaine in Indiana for writing to the podcast this week, and I asked if I could share her message as well. Quote, thank you for the work you are doing through your podcast. I have been a 1st and 2nd grade teacher for 17 years in a private pre-K through 8 school. We are located in Northwest Indiana and currently serve 740 students. I am excited to switch roles next year in facilitating our library. I am redesigning the space to become a collaborative learning hub. I will be sharing the space with our STEM teacher. I'm thankful to be working with a flexible schedule. I'm wondering what tips you and your listeners may have for me to implement a flexible schedule that encourages teacher collaboration and student visits. Logistically, how do you make it work best for everyone? How do you get things started at the beginning of the school year? I appreciate your insights. End quote. And I did suggest to Elaine that she listen to my recent interview with Laura Foy and the middle school programming episode. I will put out a shout out for anyone who would like to put some ideas together regarding collaboration and working with flexible scheduling, and especially also co-teaching. I know that some school librarians describe what they do as co-teaching. And so if anybody would like to put some ideas together, by all means, do not hesitate to reach out to the podcast. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, episode suggestions, and questions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Skype in the library, and my interview with Jennifer Lewis. I am so grateful for Jennifer Lewis. She has returned for a follow-up episode. For listeners who haven't listened to your first episode, Jennifer, please tell us about your library assignments and the grades you teach and the programs you offer.
Thank you for having me back, Amy. It's a pleasure to be back. I work at a K-5 elementary school. We're about an hour north of Atlanta. My school has about 950-ish students, and I do not have a clerk or aide. I do have a lot of great parent volunteers, though.
Outstanding. Are you on a fixed schedule? Are you on a flexible schedule?
I am on a flexible schedule. I usually see our kindergarten, first grade every week, and then second through fifth grade, just depending on their needs, usually once, twice, 3 times a month.
Wonderful. You were supposed to present at ISTE 20 in Anaheim this June. And as of the date we record this interview, that conference has now been postponed until November 2020. And many listeners can relate. The decision to present, to that submission process, and then generating that presentation takes a great deal of investment on your part. Can you tell me, where did you get the inspiration for this presentation? And it's called the Soar with Skype in 10 Totally New Ways.
So when the call for submissions opened up, I knew that I wanted to attend ISTE, and I started thinking about which technology tools I use regularly that might be something that I could share with other people. And Skype was definitely at the top of the list. I use it very often in our media center. So I thought maybe that'd be a good session.
Well, and listeners might have guessed, and you'd be right. This podcast has not had a Skype episode yet because this is a huge gap in my own personal experience as a school librarian. But talking to you, it's very obvious that you love incorporating Skype into your lessons.
I do. I have found that Skype is such an engaging tool for students. They love connecting with other people, no matter who it is on the other end of the laptop. And there are students at my school, maybe like at your school or your listener students, who don't have that opportunity to travel and see other places and meet other people outside our little community. So Skype allows us to flatten the walls of our school, and our kids can travel anywhere through Skype.
Well, and I have to imagine now that we are in a place of distance learning and teaching remotely, we are all confined to our places that where we live. I'm going to reveal my true ignorance when I ask you this question, but is Skype always the platform you use? I mean, we've always are there other conferencing platforms that you use? I know now we're using Google Meet and Zoom, and I've heard of others. Is it a rather sort of brand name, but we use other platforms, or is it we always use Skype?
There are lots of other platforms. Skype is the one that I use most often and I'm most familiar with. A few years ago, our district bought all of our school's fancy video conferencing equipment, and we used it and we liked it, but we found that Skype was really just as easy to use and just as reliable. So that's primarily what we use. We have also used Zoom. In a pinch, we've used FaceTime or Facebook Messenger. There's been a few times that we couldn't get a connection or get it to connect to my board or whatever. So we'll just pull out any tool that we can use.
Okay, terrific. Wonderful. Well, I imagine there has to be some sort of on-the-fly decision-making when you are in that situation where you have your guest, you have a room full of children, and you have to be willing to try multiple solutions. It's sort of a game day decision right there on the spot.
Absolutely. There was one time we were playing Mystery State Skype with a librarian in Indiana, and we couldn't connect for whatever reason. So we had initially met through Facebook. So we pulled up Facebook Messenger and just made the call through that, and it worked just as fine.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, and I think that is that sort of fear that something might go wrong should not be the reason why we don't try Skyping people, because I think there is a significant number of educators for whom technology creates this sort of inherent risk that something might not go as planned, because you sort of open up the potential for something not to happen. And I think when we become risk takers through technology, we have to recognize that there is this possibility, this potential that we might have to go with a plan B or a plan C, or admit to our students that, you know what, it didn't work this time. Sorry, kids.
Yes, unfortunately, that does happen sometimes.
So I don't know if this is a chicken or the egg question or which came first, but which comes first, your Skype contact, and then you match it with the grade or the teacher you want to bring in? Or is it the request from your grade level teacher or the subject matter, and then you go looking for the Skype contact?
So I found connections in both ways, actually. Sometimes I am the one that responds to requests that I see online, and sometimes I'm the one that makes the request. So I'm part of a Facebook group called Mystery Skype in the Classroom. And I've also used the hashtag Mystery Skype on Twitter. And those are two great ways to find connections, either respond to connections or to make your own requests. And I'm part of the Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert Group, and that is a great group to find connections through because those are all people who use Skype regularly as well. So if we're connecting with another group based on a standard or a teacher request, then I will initiate that call so that we can plan it so that it's in conjunction with their classroom learning and happens about the same time they're covering that standard in the classroom.
Wonderful. So it sounds like tapping our PLN and putting some feelers out on social media isn't a bad way to go. It does seem like a random question. Oh, by the way, do you Skype with students? And I'm sure that there are some professions which regularly get tapped, and then there's somebody who might never have been asked to do a Skype, and they're flattered. And it's what a wonderful opportunity to connect.
Definitely.
Are you scheduling the Skype meetings to augment your lessons in the library, or are you scheduling Skype meetings to bolster a grade level or a subject matter that's being addressed in the classroom? Because I'm sort of wondering if I'm thinking like an elementary versus, I'm an elementary librarian like you, or if secondary librarians are doing this for different reasons. But the library is great because we can bring in multiple classes for these opportunities.
Yes, usually I schedule Skype sessions in conjunction with what our grade level is teaching. I have copies of all of our grade levels curriculum maps. So I try to look for connections based on that so I know which standards our classes are learning at which times. For example, we have a fourth grade. Our fourth grade does branches of government in the fall. And I found a great program that's offered by the National Archives at Fort Worth where they go through all the branches of government and they compare it to building an actual building. And so that's a great program that my fourth grade teachers request every fall. And because our media center is so big, we can actually schedule 3 classes at a time. So we actually do that program 2 different times to get all of our classes in.
Can I ask, it sounds like there is always an opportunity that you might tap an organization each year. So you might go back to ask a repeat, somebody who's already done a Skype. So you sort of have an expectation, a standing opportunity to connect with somebody via Skype.
Yes, and most of the organizations that we work with every year are very accommodating. They love to have repeat requests, and it's helpful on both ends because once you've done that Skype session multiple times, you know what they expect from you, and they know you, and it's easier to set up the sessions once you've established that relationship with them.
That, and now I have to ask you a question. Their expectations of you. Can I ask, what kinds of expectations have your Skype guests had of you, the librarian, the host of this conversation?
If it's an organization that does educational programs through Skype, they want the teachers to be active and involved. They want us to be looking for students who have questions or want to answer questions because they don't know the students' names and they can't see all of the students in the session. So we need to, the teachers need to be there to call on students. And also, for example, with the National Archives program, and I said we had 3 classes in the Media Center at once, they can't hear those students who are at the back of the room asking their question or answering a question. So we kind of have to step in sometimes and let the presenters know what those students said. So being an active part of the program is really the biggest part of what our program providers want.
Can I ask, have you ever been asked to do a considerable amount of preparation? Have your Skype guests ever asked you to read something with the students or do a pre-lesson before having the Skype meeting?
Program providers often give suggestions because they do like for students to have some kind of background knowledge sometimes about what they're presenting. Usually that's not a problem because we schedule them in conjunction with what students are learning anyways in the classroom, so they do have some background knowledge. But if it's scheduled for the beginning of the unit, then sometimes it does take a little bit of going over that. So most program providers will give you links to suggested lessons or a vocabulary list, some things to go over. Usually they'll let you know what they want you to have ready for the students before the program, and then they'll also send follow-up activities.
At the risk of sounding negative, but I get to ask questions which I'm thinking my listeners might also be thinking, and selfishly, I want to know this myself. But I'm not alone when I raise the issue of scheduling Skype meetings and those of us with a fixed schedule. You know, if I see my second graders on B and D day from 2:35 to 3:25, making a Skype connection is going to be very tricky.
Yes, scheduling is definitely a challenge when it comes to Skype, not just because of fixed schedules, but also because of time zones. So I collaborate a lot with our technology lab teacher at my school, and she is on a fixed schedule. So one thing that we have been able to come up with is if we couldn't find a connection for a class, then sometimes we will split that class in half. And she takes half of the class and I take half of the class, and we actually Skype from inside the building. So it sounds kind of silly, I think, but the kids still love it, and you're still able to do the activity, and the kids are still learning about being good digital citizens and how to conduct a Skype session. So we've done that, and so a media specialist who is on a fixed schedule could find another class in the building, maybe a classroom teacher that she could set up a Skype session with. So that's one thing that librarians on a fixed schedule could do.
Wonderful. Now you just made me think of another question. All right. So clearly your students have become accustomed to doing Skype in the library because this is important to you and your programming. For those of us who are curious, when you, in the minutes leading up to the Skype call starting, can you tell us what instructions would you put out there to your students simply because you're an educator and you need these students to not embarrass you in front of this perfect stranger who's going to be Skyping your students in a minute? What instructions do you give your students in the minutes leading up to a Skype conversation?
Well, my tech lab teacher and I actually do spend quite a bit of time talking about Skype behavior. We do a lot of practice sessions within the classroom and the media center with our students to tell them what our expectations are. So when the screen first pops up, the kids all want to stand up and wave at themselves. So we talk about how that's okay to do right now, but when the actual Skype starts, we need our students to be sitting down and keep their hands in their lap so that it's not distracting to the other students. We talk to them about staying quiet enough so that everybody can hear. We talk to them a lot about the best way for the people on the other end to hear and how we would expect them to introduce themselves. So if we're playing like Mystery State Skype, if a student comes up to the camera, they can, if they have a question, then we want them to come up to the camera and introduce themselves with their first name only and say their question directly into the camera so that the people on the other end can hear.
Wonderful. And this makes me think of one more thing. I imagine you are doing Skype with some very young students. Do you include your kindergartners, your first graders in these Skype activities? How do you establish an understanding that not everybody is going to get to talk to the guest on the Skype conversation? Because we'll have an assembly and every hand will go up in my kindergartners, my first graders, because there is this expectation that every single one of them has to ask their question.
That's true. A lot. They are very involved. They want to participate for sure. Yeah, we don't always have time for every student to ask a question or talk in the camera. And so we just let them know that hopefully their turn will come during our next Skype session, and start the next Skype session with who has not had an opportunity to come up to the camera yet.
Do you ever have your students write out their questions in advance for their guest, or is it rather organic? The kids just come up with their questions?
I like for my students to come to a Skype session. For example, if we're Skyping with an author, I want my students to come prepared with a question. Now, that's not to say that they can't ask a question that pops into their head during the session, but I like for them to think in advance about questions that they might want to have answered, so that they're more ready to ask questions, and it's not just the first thing that pops out of their mouth.
Right. I've noticed that oftentimes the chain reaction that is created when you put very young students in a situation, their comments will oftentimes echo one another, and you're going to get something similarly repeated again and again. So I just know from having worked with very young students this expectation that all of them have a right to be heard during something like this. So I'm curious, how do you decide who you're going to Skype with? What goes into this process?
Usually our Skype sessions are curriculum based, so that's the first step in deciding who to Skype with. But then for finding connections, I usually just reach out to people at my school and see if they know anybody who knows anybody. And even if you email someone or send them a Twitter message, almost anyone that you're interested in Skyping with is going to be willing to give 10 to 20 minutes to students at school. One of my gifted groups that I work with, we have been using the app Codable to practice coding during the Hour of Code in December. And they had some questions about the app. So I reached out to the creators of the app and asked them if they would be willing to Skype with our kids. And they were very excited because they wanted to hear the kids' feedback on their app also. So they answered the questions and got feedback on the app. And so that was a great experience for our kids.
Well, and listeners, for those of you who are curious, Codable is spelled Kodable. And I like that there's this opportunity to sort of, in a way, respond to students' interests as they occur during the school year. So you might not be able to anticipate these Skype opportunities until you're teaching a lesson and it becomes rather spontaneous in the students' ideas of what they want to learn about. So, what kinds of activities do you do when you are incorporating a Skype call?
So we love to connect with classrooms and other schools all around the country. And one of our favorite things to do is to play mystery animal or mystery number or mystery state Skype. So usually mystery animal is a great starting game to play with kindergarten or first grade. Mystery number is appropriate for, I would say, grades 2 and up, and mystery state Skype for grades 4 and 5. So mystery animal is where each classroom decides on an animal that they want the other class to guess. So they come up with the animal in advance, and with kindergarten, it's important to talk about that animal with the class that chooses it before you go live on the call, just so that they kind of have an idea of how to answer the questions. And then one student from each class will come up to the camera and ask a yes or no question to help figure out what the animal is. So we usually alternate back and forth between the two classrooms asking the questions. And we teach our kindergarten and first grade students that they have to be absolutely sure that they know what the animal is before they guess it. So it doesn't turn into a game of, is it a bear? Is it a cat? Is it a tiger? So that's a great fun game for kindergarten and first grade to start with. Mystery number is a game where we come up with how many places we want the number to be, and how many places, like to the thousands or whatever. And The teams go back and forth asking yes or no questions to figure out what the number is. Is there a even number in the tens place would be an example of a question they would ask for that. And Mystery State Skype is where if you can connect with a school in another state, that's ideal. You have to make sure your students aren't wearing any sports gear from their hometown sports team. But the classes will go back and forth asking yes or no questions until they figure out what state the other classroom is. And all three of these games are super great games for critical thinking because your students are having to use the clues. They're having to listen and pay attention, find out what the other team is saying so that they can figure out the answer. And their goal is to do it before the other class does.
Well, and I do want to interrupt there. I mean, it seems like listening is obvious, but it also, I having worked with very young students, they get so fixated on their role as asking the questions that they don't necessarily hear the answers,
Yes.
It's both listening, asking the question, but also processing the answer that you've been given. How do you connect with these other classrooms? Are these just friends of friends of friends, or you again are reaching out on social media and finding a classroom that way?
Yes, usually on social media through Facebook groups or through Twitter. There are classes who Skype with all 50 states every year with their class. And so there's a pretty active community of mystery Skypers on social media. So finding a connection is not a challenge usually.
Right. And again, you have to be sensitive to the time zones so that everybody is connecting at the right time. So, I love to hear about these because I know listeners are out there taking notes and realizing how many fun things we can do with Skype. How can school librarians participate in something like a Skype-a-thon? And I understand that name has changed since.
Yes. Last year, I believe Microsoft changed the name of Skype-a-thon to Microsoft Global Learning Connection.
Okay.
So they have not announced the dates of this event this year, as far as I know. Usually it's in November, like sometime at the beginning of November. And it's a great event because so many different people are participating and it's super easy to find connections, people to Skype with. A couple of years ago, my tech lab teacher and I connected every single classroom in our building for some type of activity. Some of them Skyped with experts, some of them Skyped with other classrooms, but we had a different activity for every grade and made sure every class participated. And it was a big celebration at our school. The kids, our school, we promoted it on social media. The kids loved it. They have been asking since when we're going to do that again.
No, and clearly a memorable experience because of the scale at which you did this. It sounds like many people in your building are also on board with the learning opportunities that Skype presents. Do you find yourself being tapped for tech support when Skype happens in the classroom? Yes, definitely. It sounds like you're the go-to person. Obviously, when you have Skype in your library this much, if a classroom teacher does Skype in their classroom, you're somebody who they could bring in to walk them through what they need to do.
Yes. And sometimes our teachers will just set up a time. If they've made the connection already, they'll just set up a time and reserve the media center to bring their students in. So I'll handle the software and make sure the connection's there. And then they lead the Skype session.
Nice. And we talk about our libraries and our resources, and our space is a resource. Our collection, whether it's digital or it's print, is a resource. And then you are the resource. And so this is an excellent example of where our space is being used as the resource and the librarian is also the resource. What an excellent opportunity to argue for flexible scheduling, because for those of us who are in our libraries all the time, our space as resource is less of an opportunity. We're always teaching.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I don't think I could make the connections I do for our students on a fixed schedule.
Well, and it sounds like when you, especially because you have a flexible schedule, you are much more of a collaborative partner in your building with your teachers. You are valued because not just because you're information specialist or resourceful, but also because you can teach with them side by side when you're tackling an activity. So I love one of the wonderful benefits of using Skype is that you are avoiding the expense and logistics of trying to schedule a IRL school field trip, one in which your students get on a bus and go somewhere.
Yes, and there are some great resources available to help people make connections with different online field trips that they could do through Skype. So I wanted to share a couple of resources that I've used. One is the Center for Interactive Learning. It's the CILC.org. And their goal is to connect students with educational institutions, or they also set up a lot of collaborations where you could do a project online with another class. So if you go to that website and create a profile, letting them know what subjects you teach, what grades you teach, you'll receive emails once a week or with new collaborations, or you can just search on their website and find an organization that will support learning in the classroom. So through the CILC, we've connected with the National Archives, the George Washington Carver National Monument, Homestead National Monument, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and lots of other places. There's also a new Skype in the Classroom website, which is education.skype.com. And Microsoft has just launched that brand new site. So it's a little bit different if you haven't been on the site in a while. And it lists field trips that you can take with your students. You can also find other educators to connect with, to do a mystery Skype or to do a collaboration through a project or something like that. And we've connected with several national parks through Skype in the Classroom. They offer some really great trips.
So my question is, you mentioned the national parks, and you would recommend going through Skype in the Classroom versus going to the national park website and doing a contact through that, through their own website? Which would you recommend?
I do like the Skype in the Classroom website because it will show you when their availability is, and it'll give a lot of really great details about the program and what you can expect from it.
Wonderful. All right. Terrific. So what strategies, and I've taught littles in the library for 13 years. They are like squirrels. They're just absolute squirrels. What strategies do you use to ensure that your students are engaged in the Skype interview when it's happening?
So during mystery animal or mystery number or mystery state Skype, it helps to have visuals. Sometimes it could be something that students are holding in their hands, or it could be something that they could be looking at. For example, with the little guys in kindergarten, first grade, then we might have a piece of chart paper where we're making notes about what the other class says is true about their animal or not true. The kids might have a clipboard, like for mystery number Skype. They might have a clipboard where they're taking notes and they are marking off the numbers that could be in each place value as we go. We've also used digital tools like a OneNote. We've set up a OneNote notebook. You could also use Seesaw for this, where we have a map of the United States and we'll assign maybe 2 students who will cross off the states as they're eliminated. And then the other students can also have either a laptop in front of them where they're looking at that OneNote notebook, or sometimes we'll have like a physical map where they can cross it off. So something in front of them that kind of keeps their attention in so that they're not forgetting the clues that they've heard can help students stay engaged during mystery Skype sessions. If you have super squirrely kids, you could assign them to be your yes, no, we're thinking kids, and give them signs that say yes and no and we're thinking. And so they can be the ones who actually go up to the camera and hold up a sign that answers yes or no. or tells them we're thinking. So that gives them a job. And a lot of people who play Mystery State Skype regularly do assign jobs to their students. And that is another way to keep them very engaged.
Wonderful. I imagine a real low-key tool you could also use is one of those little lap dry erase boards. Give the kids a dry erase pen and a dry erase board that they just put on their laps, and they can take their notes that way. I know, just trying to think of inexpensive ways to encourage this. So how do you make sure that the Skype sessions you are scheduling support your learning standards?
So a few years ago, I'll share with you one of my favorite Skype activities that we've done. A few years ago, a media specialist in my district shared this activity, and it was during the Winter Olympics, and she made a presentation that focused on several of the athletes that our students were seeing on TV. And she had a little paragraph about where those people were from, or it had clues about where they were from. So then our students had to use an atlas to look up where the athlete was from. So this was an activity that I did with my tech lab teacher. We split the classes in half, and we had them kind of competing against each other to see which class could figure out where the athlete was from first. And we loved that activity. It just seemed very simple, but the kids loved competing against their friends. It was only half of the kids, so it was a little less hectic than it would be if you had your entire class at once. And it was a perfect connection to the standards, learning atlases, finding information in books. So since then, we've just been thinking of, looking at standards and finding ways to incorporate Skype games to teach those standards and reinforce them. The kids love participating in a Skype session. They love the competition. So anytime you can pull that into an activity with the kids, it is very engaging.
Well, and I think also because everything you've done has involved teamwork. It hasn't singled out you're not picking on the smart kid to do all the work. I think that even the shyest of students would feel support because, number one, you're still sitting in your familiar library space. You feel safe and you're surrounded by your classmates, but you're doing something that may be strange and unfamiliar. But as a team effort, even our students who tend to be withdrawn or shy would feel like they would feel emboldened or, courage to speak up because they're surrounded by their classmates, not strangers.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had definitely a high level of engagement, even among some of our more quiet and shy students. They want the opportunity to go up to the camera and talk to the other class, just like the rest of them.
Wonderful. Can you share with us, there are some national events which we can incorporate Skype into. Can you share some of those opportunities with us today?
Yes. So Dot Day is celebrated in September. So we have used that as a reason to connect with some other schools before. During Dot Day, we will read, the other media specialist and I will read aloud The Dot by Peter Reynolds. And we have had our students actually decorate dots and sent them to the other class that we Skyped with. One year, one of my second grade classes actually became pen pals for the whole year with the other class as a result. I know the classroom teachers decided to continue that relationship. So that was a lot of fun. We've also done connections for Global Read Aloud. And I've done this in a couple of ways. With Global Read Aloud, there are different books that are selected every year that kids all over the world are reading. And there's usually picture books and a chapter books that for different levels. So I've done this with second grade classes. We've connected once a week for the duration of the Global Read Aloud and read a picture book and then did an activity with the other class on the other end. And that was kind of fun because then, the kids could go up to the camera and share what they created in the activity that we did after reading the book. And this year I worked with one of my fifth grade teachers to do Global Read Aloud. They have been reading Front Desk by Kelly Yang, and the teacher found several other classes that she wanted to connect with. So we did a mystery Skype to find out where the other class was located, mystery state Skype. And then they kind of made predictions about the book, or the kids would share their thoughts about the book. So that was a lot of fun.
Well, and I saw that Three Keys, Kelly Yang's book, Three Keys, has just become available, I believe. And I don't want to encourage my kids to go out and buy it, or, I always want to be able to share the library copies, and I can't do that right now. They spend all this year going, well, when's the next book coming out? And I said, it's coming out soon. Friends, I will say, if you've ever looked up Pernille Rip's Global Read Aloud website, she has a great deal of resources, which will support you in creating programming around Global Read Aloud. So that's a lot of fun. How can school librarians use Skype to connect with an authentic audience?
So one thing that I've done to connect some of our students with experts that they may be interested in talking to is through our technology club, which I sponsor with some of the other teachers at my school. And we introduce students to lots of different types of technology, but we are not always the experts on that technology. So it's very good to have people who are able to give our students good feedback on the projects that they create, because we're impressed by everything that they do. And we're not always sure how to what direction to tell them their project needs to take. So we've been very fortunate to find parents in our community, or husbands of teachers who do know about the things that our students are creating. And so we've used Skype to connect with them a few times. Our students will present their project to the expert and get some feedback on what they can do to improve their project.
Wonderful. Well, and I think it's never a bad thing when we admit to our students that we might not have the answers, but we are going to find places where we can have their questions answered. And I think that that's an important lesson for our students to recognize as information specialists, as people who can find the answers, but we don't necessarily possess the answers at that given moment. Can you share with us how could school librarians use Skype to promote reading and literacy?
One thing that I love to do is bring authors into our school via Skype. And usually I take the approach that I'll find a book that a teacher is using in the classroom, or that a group of students is reading, and then contact that author and to see if they will connect with us. And I have found that most authors are more than willing to give us 15 to 20 minutes of their time just to do a quick Q&A for free. Some authors do charge money, and we've paid maybe one or two for Skype sessions, but usually they love to hear from kids who are reading their books and will set aside time to Skype with us. I do that with our reading club every year. We read a list of books called the Tome Society books. That's something that started in Georgia, and a lot of our Georgia schools are reading the Tome books. And so we usually start the year where I'll buy every student in the book club a copy of the author's book, and then the second meeting after they've read the book, then we connect with the author. And it's just such a great way to kick off book club every year. It gets the kids excited about the books and excited about reading, and they talk about that Skype session for the rest of the year. Every single meeting, they're still talking about the time that we connected with. This year it was Karina Jan Glazer. We read the Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. They absolutely loved it. And they've bought and read all of her other books.
I was going to say, I was very lucky to talk to her for about 5 minutes last summer at Nerd Camp in Michigan. And her new book hadn't come out yet. And she's lovely. And, I know that she does school visits, but, she lives in New York, and in her opportunities to visit your school are very narrow. So Skype is a fantastic way to do that. I know when students have asked me if we can bring in, Jeff Kinney, because, that's why not? Mrs. Herman, we want Rick Riordan to come to our school. We want Jeff Kinney to come to our school. And if it's not one of those two people, or Dave Pilkey. Mrs. Herman, why can't you bring in Dave Pilkey? I found that to be a great opportunity to teach them about how to become fans of the author's official web pages. And we do try to spend some time focusing, becoming, learning about the author's web pages, because those really are great. Oftentimes, the questions that you would ask if you could talk to them are already posted on those pages. Frequently asked questions. What's FAQ? Well, funny you should ask. Those are the questions people always ask them. So it's not as much fun as talking to them on in person or on Skype. But if you do get a question like that, sometimes directing them to the to the author's official webpage will answer some of their questions.
That is a great idea. Absolutely.
All right. So tell me what we always are looking forward, especially during this time when we are all teaching remotely and teaching from home. What goals do you have for using Skype in the future?
So here's something that I have always wanted to do and haven't done it yet, but it is definitely on my list. I'm going to make it happen next year. I would love to use Skype to play a breakout game between two different schools. So my idea is to split students at my school into maybe 3 groups and split students at the other school into 3 groups and have each group work with a group at another school to complete the breakout game. So that is something I really want to do.
Wonderful. And since we'll be sharing your social media out at the end of this episode, maybe listeners, if they would like to jump in on this, reach out and contact you. You've had an opportunity to host many Skype meetings in your library. What advice would you give to school librarians who are looking to bring classes in to attend a Skype session?
So just like we talked about earlier, I think the biggest thing is to practice. Just like everything else we do in schools, kids need to know what to expect and what your expectations are for them. So we teach them how to act during the Skype, their noise level, what their noise level should be during the Skype session, how to address someone on the other end of the call. And the other piece of advice that I have is to, whenever possible, make a test call with the person on the other end beforehand, especially if it's an individual who has, a full-time job and they're taking time out of their day to work with your students. If you could just, or an author, make sure your equipment works. If you can't connect with that person beforehand, even just making sure your equipment is set up correctly by testing it with another teacher in your district or librarian in your district that day, just to make sure everything is set up correctly so that your call will be successful.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, please, Jennifer, you've been fantastic. I know that going into this, I really knew very little. And now I feel at least I have some information I go moving forward. Please share with the listeners your social media so that we can follow you and see all the great things that you're posting on social media, and perhaps reach out if we want to Skype with your library and with your students.
Yes, I would love to hear from your listeners, and I hope that I can set up a Skype session with you this year, Amy.
Oh, gosh.
So my Twitter handle is @LibraryLou, and that's LEW. And my Instagram is @IKES Media Center.
Fantastic. Well, Jennifer, you've been wonderfully generous with your Saturday afternoon, and I'm so grateful. Friends, the podcast really does depend on people willing to share their expertise. And in this case, it's obvious we found one. So, Jennifer, have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Amy. You too.
Thank you. I am so grateful to Jennifer for sharing her expertise with us today. Be sure to check out our show notes as we included 2 links, one for Skype in the Classroom and for the Center for Interactive Learning and Collaboration. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be Hygge and Happiness and my interview with Stephanie Fiedler. I hope you will tune in.